Thank you all for joining us. This is Themes That Tell a Story, getting creative with your online mapping tools. We want to thank everybody once again for joining us. And just next slide, please. We're going to get right into this today. Folks, just a couple items of housekeeping before we start this webinar. Go to webinar logistics. What we want everybody to do and what we really encourage is for you to ask questions during the duration of this session. So the questions box in GoToWebinar is a little small, so it's right there on the right side. If you just want to pop that box up during the course of this webinar, it'd be great if you could ask as many questions that come to your mind as possible. And at the end of the session, we will get to all of them. So next slide, please. All right, well, so what's going on with today's agenda? Well, first and foremost, we always like to show a map of our MapGeo attendees. And so you can see right here, this is a fairly nationwide webinar. We're covering a lot of pockets of the states. And so we're going to show examples too from across the United States. So this is a great representation of what we might see today from these creative themes that we've cooked up for you in MapGeo. And the agenda today, we're going to start out with just, who we are. If you haven't been to one of these webinars yet, we are Applied Geographics. This is our flagship product, MapGeo, that we'll be showing off today. Could you go back to that agenda for just 1 second, actually? And we really wanted to get creative today. We wanted to go beyond the standardized sort of parcel layers and sort of the mundane things that happen that are necessary in GIS and in local GIS. But what we wanted to do was show some creative examples from across the US. So if you want to just pop to that next slide. Who are we at Applied Geographics? Well, we're a GIS firm. We have over 28 years of experience, and we are based in Boston, Mass, although we do have a few other offices, a couple of our noteworthy ones in Austin and Nashville, Tennessee. So we do all aspects of GIS data development. That means application development. That means geoanalytics. There is a wide range of products and services that we offer. So if you haven't popped over to appgeo.com, go ahead and do that as well. We do work with a wide range of technology, and we are big fans of open source. So even these products that you see today, some of it is bred out of open source technologies. This product, MapGeo, we brand it as the mapping platform for building smarter cities and counties. And we also have some regional entities on the phone today as well. So if you come from a regional entity, we of course want to cover that as well. Next slide, please. And actually, who I'd like to introduce to you, you may have seen his picture as we started this presentation, but this is Aaron Doucette. Aaron is one of our very talented sales engineers, and Aaron is going to join us and talk a little bit more about how to create these creative layers and show them off to you as we go along.
Thanks, everybody. As Jordan mentioned, Aaron Doucette here, and I'll be bringing you on a tour of a handful of maps and layers from across the country. I wanted to start off with a quote, however, that I think really speaks to what we're looking at today. And that's information is the oil of the 21st century and analytics is the combustion engine. So just as the 19th century was transformed through natural resources and cars, the way that we are looking forward into the century ahead is really about information and the way that we're able to use it, share it, consume it. And as community leaders and municipal stakeholders, there are so many decisions and information that we have access to that help us better understand our community, better understand our world, and maps are one way of bringing that to life. So I wanted you to keep this in the back of your mind as we start to explore. So a little bit about the platform that we'll be viewing all of these layers through today, MapGeo. It's developed in-house by AppGeo, and it has a user base of around 100 cities and towns across the US. It runs entirely in the browser, and all of the data that you will see today is also hosted in the cloud, which has more implications beyond just performance and flexibility, as we'll see in some of our examples. And we like to think of it as a citizens hub that connects everything. So rather than a single purpose viewer for a particular layer, each MapGeo site is really a hub of information to allow people to explore what's curious to them and allow those within the town to get access to the information they need to do their jobs and make informed decisions. And continuing the theme that Jordan brought up earlier, the the real goal of today is to explore how these tools can be used for more than just parcels. Many times when I see towns adopting a web mapping program, it's from the perspective of, well, we need a parcel viewer, we need a tax map. This is the core of our site. And while parcels are indeed the foundation of many MapGeo sites and the assessor's data that you can tap into, I like to think of them as a starting point for a rich user experience where you might be able to combine parcels and tax information with a wealth of additional knowledge and layers that, when combined, start to paint a much more intriguing picture and help answer questions about things like zoning or public safety, traffic, utilities. So what we're going to do today is look at a handful of places where that's been exactly the case. So without further introduction, let's dive into why you're all here today, which is to see how some different cities and towns and counties have been able to achieve this. So our first stop is in Santa Barbara, California, where the Santa Barbara County Association of Government is leveraging MapGeo to better understand the impacts of their airports on land use planning. Now, while Santa Barbara, the city, has close to 100,000 residents, the county, which is what we're talking about today, has close to 500,000. And beyond having that many people, they also have 5 different airports, including an international airport and an Air Force base. And the County Association of Governments is responsible for creating the plan, which looks at the land use compatibility around these airports. And the goal here is to not just necessarily, create boundaries and enforce zoning, but to ensure that these airports can continue functioning as a hub for transit, for their economy, for delivering goods and people, but also that their further development will protect the safety of the community and the well-being of those that live around them. So let's dive into the MapGeo site for this example. Just have to exit full screen here. So now we've launched into MapGeo, and the first view that you're going to have on any given MapGeo site is a familiar one, pretty much a Google Street Map. And because our platform is built on Google technology, a lot of the tools that you would be familiar with just using Google products in your daily life are going to be the basis for MapGeo. Now, we have a variety of layers that become available as we enrich our map with the information that the SB County has added. So first of all, we have these influence areas. And what's an influence area? That might be where you have low-flying aircraft circling to land, taking off, factors such as noise, vibration. So anything within this sphere of influence, is worthy of kind of further study when you're talking about maybe an airport expanding or getting larger planes as they increase international service. Beyond that, at an even finer resolution, we have these ability to look at the actual noise contours. And this is displayed in decibels, a scale measuring sound. And 60 decibels is about what you'd expect from an alarm clock. That's our largest area here, going up to 70, maybe like a lawnmower, and up to 80, which you could best describe as an airplane taking off, which is appropriate given what we're looking at. So what do these areas mean when we look at them on a map? Well, given like a street map, we might see some parcel outlines. We might start to see some neighborhoods. But toggling over to satellite, we can suddenly kind of see the map come to life and, individual homes and land use before us that fall into these different categories. And for every one of these airports in how they're developing the land use plan, all of the parcels that are impacted by these various areas, which also include the approach zones and safety zones, these are places where you may have a building height restriction in place, will come into play as we might look at the further development of these areas. So, you know, airport runways and approach paths aren't the kind of thing that your average citizen might be able to visualize in their head, but you can certainly imagine, you know, if you live close to an airport, you're getting a lot more sound, a lot more noise, and those are the type of questions and answers that, you know, this particular MapGeo installation helps answer. So we're going to move on to our next example, a little closer to home for us in Boston, and that's Natick, Massachusetts, who in 2016 and on have initiated a municipal drone program to perform a variety of functions. I can't hear you.
Just an announcement from me, Jordan. If you haven't watched our drone imagery webinar, we did hold one earlier this year. So if you'd like to ask me about that recording, or if you can just simply Google AppGeo drone webinar, if you're interested in learning how to create a drone program for your municipality, your county, your region, you can totally just jump on that webinar and look at all there is to know, because Rich Ames, the GIS coordinator over at Natick, is just a fantastic resource when it comes to how to get that started, and we're going to see in a moment actually how you can use that in a practical application.
Great. So as Jordan mentioned, Rich Ames is the GIS coordinator over at the town of Natick, and they've really been using this drone for a lot more than one might expect. For example, infrastructure assessment, being able to, say, fly and inspect the roof of a water tower without having to send a staff up on the roof is, you know, a huge safety benefit. And surprisingly, even in disaster response, as in a fire earlier this summer, they were able to actually identify and provide information to help firefighters. But one of the coolest areas, from my perspective, has been their use of their drones for kind of rapid aerial imagery. And MapGeo is a great platform for viewing all sorts of aerial imagery, and we'll launch into their installation to look how they've been able to take that drone info and bring it to life. So here we can see their map, and we don't have the whole town surveyed, but a particular few areas here that are loading up. This is actually photographs that were taken with that drone and then geo-referenced right into their map. And as I start to zoom in here, you'll see we have, you know, really sharp quality. And some of the benefits to using a you know, unmanned aerial system or a drone for an application like this is, instead of maybe waiting for once every year, once every 3 or 4 years to commission a custom flyover or wait for your state program to provide new data, is you can spin up new imagery on demand anytime you want it and any time of year for the project that you need. And this is a very particular and interesting example that we're looking at here because it represents some new development. And Natick has gone ahead and loaded in a number of vintages of aerial imagery from town-wide that we can look at. Starting with 2008, you can see this area was just a bit of empty grass and an older warehouse. Moving on to 2014, the land has been cleared for development. On to 2015, we can see the project is now under construction. And back to our drone imagery, just from the past couple of years, fully built out. So for managing larger projects like this, we see it as a really valuable tool. And not only just viewing the imagery, but layering it with the rest of your planimetric data, whether that be land use or zoning. As I turn on the zoning overlay here, we can see how the red area represents a new general residential mixed use area, and these green are kind of commercial professional offices. And additionally, we have some zoning overlays that this project was actually commissioned to fit into. And this kind of blue hash is a smart growth area, and that represents the project boundaries for this mixed use development, abutting up with kind of this housing section here. So it becomes a powerful tool not just to tap into the parcels, tap into the imagery, but to ensure that projects are being built within the right boundaries and meeting the criteria that have been specified. We see that as just a really awesome way to layer information and get more value out of the data that you already are collecting. So moving on once again, we have a lot to get through. Rifle, Colorado. It's a town in western Colorado along the river there where water is becoming an increasingly precious resource.
And just a quick reminder, folks, as we go along, just make sure we did get our first question that came in. Just make sure that you're popping up that questions box. And if anything comes to your mind over the course of this webinar, please do ask a question. We'll get to every question at the end of the webinar, but just wanted to make a quick reminder about that.
Thanks, Jordan. So to tell you a little bit about Rifle, they're a center for the ranching industry. So despite being in a relatively remote part of the state, you have a high density of homes and families in a tight cluster. And as such, they have a municipal water system. C&D is collection and distribution, and their duties include the standard things you might be familiar with, like flushing lines, exercising valves, responding to breaks. And they've transitioned all of their water infrastructure into a centralized GIS database, which we're able to tap into through MapGeo, which has really revolutionized the way they do not only their day-to-day operations, but planning as well. And through MapGeo, they're also able to expose all of this data to the public, which is, I think, pretty revolutionary to give citizens some insight into what's going on underground that really kind of powers their lives through the water that they're drinking. And here we can see the town with the water system overlaid on top of it. And we have access to all of these features going from distribution mains to storage tanks and valves. And why does this matter for an online mapping application? Well, just to jump back to the slides here, think about your data when it was offline. You were referencing as-built or Mylars for every particular street and development and project, and to know exactly, how deep a valve might be or how old a particular line is or what's the material, finding the exact document and making sure it's the newest one, hasn't been superseded by new construction. It's kind of like putting together a jigsaw puzzle every single time. But with a MapGeo installation, as you would have with any form of GIS, you have access to all this information and know it's authoritative and know it's the newest and latest and greatest. So heading back to our town here, we can see their whole system. As we get closer, we see more features appear with their IDs coming up if we highlight them, understanding the material, the year built, all that critical information. And let's say in a real life example, a particular neighborhood is experiencing, say, some discoloration in their water or a main break. DPW staff could pop in that address and within seconds know the exact line responsible, what valves might need to be closed to remedy that situation. And one feature that I find particularly valuable is the access to Google Street View, which comes with every MapGeo installation, and actually pop in and take a look at that infrastructure, right from their desk. And, before they even drive out there, know, all right, here's the manhole, here's the service inlet, here's the hydrant, and have an idea of exactly what to look for before, they even leave the office. I find that to be a particularly useful feature of MapGeo, which I haven't seen many other viewers bring to life. Moving on yet again to Carson City, Nevada, capitals of the state. Here we have a city of about 55,000 out in the northwest section of Nevada. And what makes this town unique is how they've really used MapGeo as a tool to take their public safety data and bring it to the next level, bring it to life. The ways they've been able to accomplish this are pretty unique in my opinion. Those boxes that you might see on a commercial building, that a little black box with a key, those are for firefighters to be able to access, say, an elderly person's home for a check-in, or a commercial building after hours without breaking down a door or a window to get inside. They've taken all of those boxes and their location and their codes and published them through MapGeo with an internal login. So firefighters can get access to the exact location of the box and the code online, maybe as they're responding to a call or from the dispatch station, without needing to look that information up in a physical binder, which could be tedious. In these cases, seconds really can be a factor that saves lives. And the same has been done for their fire run book, which you can imagine as a digital copy of a fire station wall map. When a call comes in, an address can be punched in, and the exact responding station will know where to go and who is responsible for taking the call. And beyond that, similar to what you saw in Rifle, all of their hydrants are mapped as well. So let's take a look at this in reality and show off some of these cool features. So here we can see a neighborhood with all of the hydrants. Clicking on them can give us a little bit more information about each one as they've loaded it in. We also have Street View, as I demonstrated before, where we can verify that the hydrants that we have in our database are in fact the ones that we see in reality, and they haven't been taken out of service. And a really critical factor when it comes to this community is just their position in the environment on the edge of some areas that are pretty prone to wildfire exposure. And for any community that's facing that type of risk, mapping and understanding the wildland urban interface is really crucial. And that's what's represented by this green line here. The wildland urban interface, which we'll look at in a little bit of detail here, is really the boundary between kind of open or forested lands and populated areas. And to really create a safe community, a fire adapted community, having collaboration with your citizens, with your businesses, with your public safety to understand best practices about constructing buildings, what roof materials are used, what kind of space is kept clear around buildings, has really gone a long way in saving lives when we see wildfires becoming more and more devastating. So having this area mapped throughout the entire town has been a real crucial asset when it comes to planning, when it comes to understanding, you know, the impacts of the natural environment and the built environment. So Carson City has done a really great job of that and are kind of leading the charge in the public safety side of online mapping with all of these tools. I'll show you here. We can even turn on the sprinkler buildings, for example, buildings that have a sprinkler system and fire stations. And if we were logged in as a firefighter, we'd also have access to all of those codes as well. So you can really determine what layers are visible to what audience, which is a cool feature. Moving on yet again, we have Bountiful Utah, which from this picture, I almost read that as beautiful the first few times I saw it. So Bountiful, to give you a little context, is a suburb just north of Salt Lake City with a population of 44,000, but being so proximal to the mountains, which make that area so well known around the world, they're kind of a hub for the hiking trails and have a lot of growing tourism. And for many communities around the country, you know, we think of our web maps as tools to inform our citizens and inform our local government, but they're increasingly used by people looking to come in from the outside to maybe explore your trails, to explore points of interest. And we found maps are a way that people really enjoy doing that and are a critical part of this total expenditure from Taurus 2, 8.5 billion in 1 year in 2016, and that's generating over $1 billion in revenue for the state and local towns as well. So how is Bountiful using their maps to support these efforts? Well, they've got a lot of layers, but the one I want to show you today is actually their trail system, which you can think of a hiking map on paper as kind of a static thing. Get lost in the woods, find your way back out. Well, they've taken that and made it online, where all of these orange lines represent a different trail, and not just for their own town, but the entire region of trails and networks around the town as well. And clicking on a particular trail, we can get a bit of information about what it's used for, what activities are allowed, whether equestrian, yes, mountain bikes, no. So for someone coming and planning a vacation that would be centered around hiking or biking, these are great attributes to be able to dive into. And having access to this really beautiful Google terrain view brings some of these mountains to life more than you'd get out of their basic road. We can also launch into satellite as well. And one feature that I'd like to share as I was putting this together that I thought was really fun is not only is Street View a powerful tool for seeing what's on the street, but people have taken pictures along their hikes and actually created these 3D photospheres. So if I was planning for a hike out here, I might like to know, what's the trail conditions? Do I need to bring my hiking boots, or could I use running shoes? I'm taking a plane in and I can't have room for both. We can actually drop in to the top of the mountain and get this beautiful 360-degree view and see the trail, see what we expect to see from the top. And there are hundreds or thousands of these different kind of virtual lookout points that we can drop into. I think that's a pretty fun feature.
Thanks, Aaron. And yeah, we like to bill MapGeo as the best first impression your town can ever make. So when we're talking about these beautiful environments that surround Bountiful, and when we're talking about prospective residents, not just existing residents, I mean, if they're coming in, if they're looking at their properties that they may be purchasing or looking to move to, and they can see these awesome things in the neighborhood, like that's how we're going to step outside the normality of the parcel layers and start giving people this really contextual, really awesome kind of good feeling that gives that good first impression.
Thanks. So now we're coming a little closer to home again for me, Gloucester, which if you think of Boston as an old city, Gloucester has it beat by at least a couple decades, being incorporated in 1642. And throughout that nearly 400 years, they've been a fishing and kind of nautical capital of the entire region. And they have a pretty well built out MapGeo site. And I wanted to share how they've been able to take some of that cultural history and their current status as such an important maritime hub and bring those pieces to life through their maps. So here we can see Gloucester right on the Atlantic Ocean with a beautiful harbor and inlets all around. And being such an old city with there's so much history, our MapGeo team wanted to bring some of that to life. And that was accomplished by scanning in some historic maps from, in this case, the 1800s, and georeferencing them on top of this modern day map where they're lined up perfectly. And if we zoom in here, we can actually see details such as the old names of streets and the old port where buildings used to be, where all these features that go back hundreds of years are now accessible in the modern era through web mapping. These are maps which may have been just sitting in a drawer in the local library and are now accessible for anyone with a great deal of clarity and customization. And I think being able to look at how the landscape has changed over time, over this 100 years, 200 years, is a really valuable asset when it comes to planning for the future as well, as we've seen so many cities do in preparing for climate change and all of these risks, which some areas used to be water and are now land. Well, they're trying to make their way back there, and having that context to dive into is so valuable. Beyond the historic system, we have some more modern layers. I wanted to share one that I thought was pretty cool, having spent a little bit of time out on boats. This is the actual NOAA navigational chart for the town of Gloucester. And as we're able to zoom in, we can get all these detailed channel markers and depth soundings. And this is a layer that's available for any city on the coast or a river that has a NOAA chart, to be able to drop that in and bring it to life in the form of an interactive map, I think is a lot of fun, especially for anyone who's used the paper version of one of these charts. Gloucester's gone beyond this with mapping out the location of all of their moorings as points with attributes such as the type of boat that they're suitable for, or whether they're available for rental. And when we layer this with their imagery, we can really see kind of the town come to life. Here's the leaf off, and I believe Google will be leaf on. You can actually see all the boats in the harbor hooked up to their mooring. This is, I think, a really creative use of point data in the form of where these moorings are in the context of their entire city with the rest of the layers. And one other feature I'd really like to share that comes in context with the bridging the past and the present is this documents feature, where we're able to look at all of these scanned in documents that can be hosted for any given parcel. For example, we can pop in and get right into a drainage map from, in this case, the 1900s, 1960s, sorry, and have some standalone maps as well, bringing additional context for any given area.
And Aaron, this may be a good time just to mention, as we do have a few new people that have just joined us. I know that it's just after 2:30. That makes sense. Thank you for joining us, by the way, in your busy day. We want to just mention that anybody who did just join us, or if you've been on the call with us, to just ask as many questions that come to your mind as possible as we go through. So the questions box, it is on the right side of your GoToWebinar screen. If you want to just pop that box open and ask those questions, we'll be happy to answer anything that comes to your mind.
So next up is North Andover, which is a town in the northeast of Massachusetts, right on the New Hampshire border. And it's a town that AppGeo's been working with for quite a while. We've long worked with transportation agencies and the related data during the work that we've undergone. And a recent addition to that has been analyzing commuter flow. And why that's important for North Andover is, they're a relatively small town, but the corner of some pretty important interstates, and as such, they're looking at people commuting to and from Boston and also to and from cities in New Hampshire. And it was just recently announced that the city was selected as a home for a new Amazon distribution center, which will bring not only additional jobs, but an additional flow of traffic through all of the different delivery trucks that will be coming in and out on a daily basis. So Chris McClure, who has been one of our clients for over 3 years now, started working on this project with us, AppGeo, and we have a whole additional webinar on this topic for those who are interested. I'm sure Jordan can share out the link, but I'll give you a brief overview now. They wanted to look at the kind of flow of commuters in and out of the town and actually visualize that to better understand, where people are coming in and where they're going to. And we'll take a look at that now through MapGeo. So here you can see the town, kind of nestled between two of the biggest interstates in the whole state, 93 and 95. And as you can see, they have buildings, they have parcels, but what they were successfully able to add was this whole layer about commuter flow. And this data was summarized based on the ACS, similar to the census, where at a census block level, we're able to pinpoint exactly where people are commuting in and where people are commuting out. So these orange lines that are now appearing on your screen represent the number of individuals from each of these different origin points. So we see those coming in from Haverhill, from Lowell, from Boston, from Somerville. Those are for jobs that are in North Andover. And if we toggle on commuters out, we can see where people who live in North Andover, where they're headed. So this was really cool to see just how many are going to Boston, just how many are going to Marlboro, real centers for industry, as well as Burlington, but also understanding the flow across state lines from New Hampshire. And they were able to take this information and, compare it to things like the local bus lines, what communities those serve between Lawrence and North Andover, and also use information such as income to see, how our, when we're looking at transit-oriented development, those are some factors that come into play. And when we turn on the Amazon Distribution Center, if I zoom out here, oops, this is actually a drive time map showing exactly how far away each of these areas is from the distribution center, which is pretty cool to have that exact road network generated layer.
And obviously that shows off this level of where the high density of Amazon trucks might be, right in the center of that.
Exactly. So, going beyond just the parcels and the buildings and the zoning to really an analytical data set where we can look at trends and really summarize a large amount of information, given what the source of this data set looks like, to drill down to, what might turn into real world decisions as this new distribution center is coming to.
And Aaron, you mentioned that webinar. We did hold that webinar just a couple weeks ago. We do go into more depth on how regional connections are formed and how this data can help inform decision making with transit or with other developments. So if you are interested in that, definitely reach out to me, Jordan, or you can certainly just Google Regional Connections Webinar App Geo and find it just the same.
Great. So moving on yet again. A little further, but still part of the U.S., is the U.S. Virgin Islands. And you might think that's an odd place for a map geo installation. But this story has a little bit of depth to it, no pun intended, as it was actually set up as a response to the hurricanes which occurred in 2017. So as many of you may know, this territory was impacted by not one but two hurricanes in one season, a Category 5 Irma and then a Category 4 only 2 weeks later, Hurricane Maria. And it was almost a direct hit. And as such, all GIS services and servers and data networks on island were essentially taken offline. The whole island went dark, and all of a sudden access to all the information, including parcels and landowners, wasn't accessible. And in a disaster response scenario, that's kind of a worst case situation. So with MapGeo, this site was actually spun up only hours after this occurred, and through the gray sky imagery, the NOAA flyover flights that occurred hours after the storm, MapGeo was actually the tool where first responders and FEMA were able to not only determine the extent of damage, but also identify individual properties, individual homeowners. And the fact that MapGeo runs within Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud, it has essentially 100% uptime, even in the event of one of these natural disasters where your local services might be completely offline. So let's take a look at that in detail. Here's what the island normally looks like, a much prettier picture with tropical blue water and just a beautiful climate. but all of that got turned upside down just a couple of years ago after these hurricanes. And I can toggle on the imagery that was taken only hours after the storm hit to compare exactly what this looked like on the ground. So here are our kind of houses and parcels before the storm. And here they are on September 15th, only a day or so after Maria. So here we can identify a parcel that has, sustained significant roof damage. There's a tarp up in this picture. Clicking on it, we can get the owner information, all of this information about the property ID, additional details. We could even, again, drop in on Street View. And similarly, when the next storm hit only 2 weeks later, we have additional imagery for the areas that essentially took a double hit. So all along here, you can see impacts to these buildings. This section of the island is actually a lot of the government-owned properties, as it is a huge asset to the US in that regard. And to have this level of kind of rapid deployment and detail in an online map viewer, I think is pretty amazing. It's the kind of tool you want to have in place before the disaster hits. So, whether we're talking about, in this case, a hurricane, but also tornado, wildfire, earthquake, these are all real dangers where the world at large might be there to help one day, and having a tool where they're able to get in and get access to this crucial information might not only help save lives, but also assess to repair and rebuild after the fact. And again, there are a number of other layers here too, which can help with those kind of first response operations. And moving on to our last example for the day, Pawtucket, Rhode Island. It's right at the mouth of the bay, which feeds all the way down to Newport in the Atlantic Ocean. Pawtucket's long been a center for industry, and they're now using MapGeo not only as a parcel viewer, but as a way to share their economic opportunity zones. And this is a relatively new concept. Economic opportunity zones were developed in 2018 by the US Treasury, who wanted to make it easier for the public to find areas that have been given special tax designation for development and kind of bringing in private capital. So within these zones, you have special tax incentives that attract new businesses, attract smart development, and essentially are designed to create jobs and enrich the community.
And just another announcement about a webinar that dovetails into this. We did hold an Opportunity Zone webinar as well back in February. It does go into a bit more detail on Pawtucket as well as a few other cities that are taking advantage of the Qualified Opportunity Zone program. So if you are interested in learning more about that, feel free to reach out to me, or again, you could Google Opportunity Zones webinar AppGeo.
Thanks, Jordan. So here you can see what that zone looks like on their map, and we can actually pop right into MapGeo to see the same thing interactively. So we have the larger town of Pawtucket, city of Pawtucket, outlined in this dotted line, but the opportunity zones are a particular subset of that. And what makes them really interesting to me for Pawtucket is that they're also looking at a potential new commuter rail station, which, as we know, having access to commuter rail, a direct link to both Providence and Boston, can bring in more foot traffic and bring in more commuting opportunities, and is usually a great plus for a community having access to that type of transportation. So we can look at both the train station buffer zones. Everything in yellow and purple is under a mile, so easily kind of walkable, to what that opportunity zone looked like. We can see that pretty much the entire designated opportunity zone falls within that great area for public transportation. And these different colors here represent different property values as they are assessed. So someone looking in to, get a new commercial project might say, well, that has to be within the right land use and the right zoning. They have that too. So commercially zoned property, residential, industrial, you can get a lot more context in a tool like this than you can on, say, a real estate website, which might just have the listings and the price. So to be able to dive in, but then also really get in on that on the ground level. If I was coming in from out of town to maybe start a new business or move my company here, I might want to see what's going on the ground. What's the foot traffic look like? What are the businesses around nearby that are going to help drive or promote my business? And yet again, having that street view availability to pop in and take a look at what you would see on the ground, outside a property that you might be looking at as either residential or an investment property, is a really valuable tool. In fact, what we're looking at here, right on near Main Street, there actually is one of these properties available that I've highlighted, which is within the opportunity zone. It's commercial, it's office space, and they're able to host not only value information, but environmental assessment and these really cool kind of property report cards, which go right into their vision database to get more detail, including building photos, building layout. The opportunity zones aren't the only theme that they have brought to life, in the fact that they also are using it for some of their natural resource protection and their wetland areas. So not only are they looking at enriching their community through investment, they're also looking at protecting these natural resources and delineating their boundaries and keeping them mapped and protecting these assets. And I believe if that wraps up our tour, we can move on to questions. So Jordan, if you'd like.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, by the way. I do see a couple questions coming in. First of all, if anybody's having audio issues, I'm really sorry about that. It shouldn't be the case. I did make a test and it looks like all systems are go. So you might want to just give another go around on your side to make sure. I mean, obviously you could hear me right now say that though, if you did have audio working. I want to start with our first question, but first and foremost, if you do have any additional questions, please ask them in the questions box now. I know that a couple of them come in at the last second. That does tend to happen. So we have our first question. Do the noise contours apply to the rocket launching observations at the Vandenberg air port? And so I took a look at those layers. They look very horizontal and very much like a plane is launching off of the runway, and not like a rocket would be lifting straight off the ground. So I don't believe that is the case. However, it does look like BCBAG has provided some safety zones which may apply to that. So if you do want to go to sbcag.mapgeo.io, or I believe, is it spcag.california.mapgeo.io? You can Google it as well. You can see if that zone applies to the rocket launches as well.
Yep.
Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that we do have both an Air Force base and municipal operations. I believe this plan was put in place mainly for those more regular air traffic. You can read versions of the report online if you Google the name of that plan. But it is pretty interesting that they also have rocket operations too. It's actually something new.
That's a very cool question, by the way. Thank you so much for asking that, Brett. So I don't think we have too many other questions today. Hopefully, what we have is a lot of light bulbs going off in people's heads with all these very cool themes. I want to thank you, Aaron, for providing all of this wonderful knowledge today, and just really encourage everybody to stay in the loop with us. We will be sending you more information. We do have another question that just came in, called it. Can municipalities choose which layers they want to present? I'll leave that up to Aaron to answer. The short answer is yes.
Thank you. So to answer that question, every single layer on MapGeo has essentially different settings for the publicity. So you can have things fully available to the public. You can have things available to, say, a particular department like public safety only, or planners or GIS. With MapGeo, you have the ability to create named users, and every single layer has the ability to either hide or show to any one of those users, including the public. So I know when it comes to a lot of things such as infrastructure and other layers that might have more sensitivity to them, that's a real concern to have that data access. In this case, I've been signed in to many of the sites that we're looking at, but they're all accessible to the public, but the layers that you'll see here on the right-hand side change depending on who you are provisioned as. But great question, and thank you for asking.
All right, so I think that just about wraps it up for today. And we want to once again thank you for joining. And this is Jordan Frazek. If you could go to that QA screen just to get some continuity sake going. We would love you to join us for any future AppGeo webinars or MapGeo webinars. So again, feel free to reach out to me. Everybody has my email address that has joined today. So reach out to me at jfrazek@appgeo.com with any questions. You can also reach out directly to Aaron if you want to answer anything more technical, or if you want to get right into the weeds with MapGeo. So once again, thank you everybody for joining. We hope you have a great rest of your week.